Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded shopping mall with the same quiet confidence she had carried through 8 years of military service. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain blue sweater that gave no hint of her extraordinary background. To everyone around her, she looked like any other 32-year-old woman running weekend errands. The mall buzzed with typical Saturday afternoon energy. Families pushed strollers past store windows displaying spring fashions. Teenagers clustered around the food court, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Elderly couples walked slowly, hand in hand, window shopping and people watching. Sarah moved through it all like a ghost, her trained eyes automatically scanning her surroundings while her mind focused on her simple mission: buy a birthday gift for her nephew. She had been out of the Navy for 6 months now, but old habits died hard. Sarah still woke up at 5 in the morning. She still made her bed with military precision, and she still carried herself with the alert posture of someone who had spent years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The transition to civilian life had been harder than any mission she had ever completed at the toy store. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the choices. During her time as a Navy SEAL, decisions were clear-cut. Protect your team. Complete the mission. Stay alive. But standing in front of endless rows of action figures and building sets, she felt lost. Her 8-year-old nephew Tommy loved superheroes, but which ones? Did kids still play with the same toys she remembered from her own childhood? A young mother with 2 small children noticed Sarah's confusion. "Looking for something specific?" the woman asked kindly. "I have boys too, so I know how overwhelming this can be." Sarah smiled gratefully. "My nephew is turning 8. He loves superheroes, but I have no idea what's popular these days." The woman launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the latest superhero trends, pointing out various toys and explaining which ones her own sons preferred. Sarah listened carefully, appreciating the genuine help. After 20 minutes of discussion, she settled on a large Lego superhero set that the woman assured her would be perfect. As Sarah stood in line to pay, she noticed something that made her military training kick in. 3 young men in their early 20s had been following her through the store. She had first spotted them near the entrance, then again by the video games, and now they were pretending to look at board games while keeping her in their peripheral vision. Their behavior set off every alarm in her head. Sarah paid for the Lego set and walked out of the store, her senses now fully alert. She took a deliberately indirect route through the mall, stopping to look in store windows and checking the reflection in the glass. The 3 men were definitely following her. They stayed about 30 feet back, trying to look casual, but their movements were too coordinated to be coincidental. Her mind raced through possibilities. Were they planning to rob her? Were they part of some larger scheme? Or were they just bored young men who thought it would be funny to harass a woman they perceived as an easy target? Sarah had dealt with dangerous enemies in Afghanistan and Iraq, but somehow the uncertainty of this situation felt more unsettling. She decided to test her theory by heading toward the mall's main exit. If they were just random shoppers, they would probably continue with their own business. But if they were following her specifically, they would change direction too. Sure enough, when Sarah turned left toward the parking garage entrance, all 3 men adjusted their path to follow. The parking garage was less crowded than the mall itself. Cars filled most of the spaces, but there were fewer people walking around. Sarah's rental car was parked on the 3rd level, and she had to decide whether to lead these potential threats to her vehicle or confront the situation here and now. Her training told her to avoid confrontation when possible, but her instincts warned her that these men were not going to give up easily. As she walked up the concrete stairs to the 3rd level, Sarah could hear their footsteps echoing behind her. They were being less careful about staying hidden now, probably because they thought they had her trapped in the relative isolation of the parking garage. She reached the 3rd level and walked toward her car, her hand instinctively moving to her hip where she used to carry her sidearm. Of course, there was nothing there now. Civilians did not walk around armed, even former Navy SEALs. The 3 men emerged from the stairwell about 20 seconds after Sarah reached her car. They spread out slightly, trying to look casual but clearly positioning themselves to cut off her escape routes. Sarah set her shopping bag down next to her car and turned to face them, her body language still appearing relaxed despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Excuse me, miss," called out the tallest of the 3 men. He had bleached blonde hair and wore a leather jacket that looked too expensive for someone his age. "We were wondering if you could help us with something." Sarah evaluated her options quickly. The parking garage had security cameras, which was good for evidence but bad for immediate help. There were other people around, but not close enough to intervene quickly if things went wrong. Her car was unlocked, but getting in would put her in a vulnerable position. The stairwell behind the men was her best escape route, but she would have to go through them to reach it. "I'm sorry, but I'm in a hurry," Sarah replied calmly, turning back toward her car. She hoped they would take the hint and leave her alone. But she was not surprised when she heard their footsteps getting closer. "Come on, don't be unfriendly," said another voice. This one belonged to a shorter man with dark hair and a cocky grin. "We just want to talk to you for a minute." Sarah kept her back to them while she pretended to look for her keys in her purse. In reality, she was using the car's side mirror to track their movements and plan her response. They were getting closer and their body language was becoming more aggressive. Whatever they wanted, it was not going to be a polite conversation. The moment of truth was approaching fast, and Sarah knew that everything she had learned in 8 years of military service was about to be put to the test in a suburban parking garage. The 3 men moved closer, and Sarah could smell cologne mixed with the unmistakable scent of alcohol on their breath. They had been drinking, which made them more unpredictable and potentially more dangerous. Her military experience had taught her that intoxicated people were harder to reason with and more likely to escalate a situation unnecessarily. "Look, lady, we're not going to hurt you," the blonde man said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We just think you're really pretty and we wanted to get to know you better. Maybe you could come have a drink with us." Sarah finally turned to face them fully, her expression calm but her eyes alert. "Thank you for the invitation, but I really need to get going. I'm meeting someone and they're expecting me." The lie came easily, a skill she had developed during intelligence-gathering missions overseas. Sometimes a simple deception could diffuse a situation before it became violent. But these 3 men did not seem interested in taking no for an answer. The third man, who had been quiet until now, stepped closer. He was the largest of the group, probably 6 feet tall and heavily built. His arms were covered in tattoos, and he had the swagger of someone who was used to intimidating people through size alone. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that. We're just trying to be friendly." Sarah noticed that they had positioned themselves in a rough triangle around her, cutting off her direct routes to escape. It was not a sophisticated tactical formation, but it showed they had planned this encounter to some degree. They were not just opportunistic predators. They were organized ones. "I appreciate that you think you're being friendly," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady. "But I'm not interested. Please leave me alone so I can go about my day." The blonde man laughed, a sound that held no humor. "Oh, you're one of those stuck-up types, aren't you? Think you're too good for guys like us?" The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah could see it in their body language, hear it in their voices. They were working themselves up, feeding off each other's energy and becoming more aggressive by the moment. She had seen this pattern before in combat zones, where groups of men could escalate from verbal posturing to violence in a matter of seconds. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Sarah replied calmly. "I just want to be left alone." "That's not too much to ask, is it?" But the big man was already moving closer, reaching out as if to grab her arm. "Maybe we need to teach you some manners about how to talk to people who are trying to be nice to you." That was when Sarah made her decision. She had given them multiple opportunities to walk away. She had been polite, then firm, then direct. But they were clearly not going to respect her wishes, and the situation was about to turn physical whether she wanted it to or not. The big man's hand was inches from her arm when everything changed in an instant. Years of training took over, and Sarah's civilian facade disappeared completely. She stepped back slightly, creating space, and her entire posture shifted into a combat-ready stance that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone with military experience. "You need to step back, now," she said, and her voice carried a tone of authority that made all 3 men pause. Gone was the uncertain woman buying toys for her nephew. In her place stood someone who radiated danger and competence, but the alcohol in their systems and their mob mentality overrode their instincts. The blonde man sneered and said, "Oh, look, guys. She thinks she's tough now. What are you going to do, karate chop us?" His companions laughed, but there was a nervous edge to the sound. Something about Sarah's transformation had unsettled them, even if they could not quite identify what it was. The big man continued reaching for her, either too drunk or too arrogant to recognize the warning signs. Sarah's training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. Multiple attackers in a confined space with limited options for escape or de-escalation. The parking garage's concrete floor and low ceiling would actually work in her favor, providing solid surfaces to use as leverage and limiting their ability to surround her completely. "Last warning," Sarah said quietly. "Walk away now and we can all forget this happened." Instead of heeding her warning, the big man lunged forward, clearly intending to grab her and probably expecting her to freeze or scream like the helpless victim they had assumed she was. What he got instead was a demonstration of why the United States Navy spent millions of dollars training people like Sarah Martinez. The first thing that surprised him was her speed. Sarah moved faster than any civilian he had ever encountered, stepping inside his reach and striking with precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. Her elbow connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and doubling him over in pain. Before his companions could react to what was happening, Sarah had already repositioned herself. She used the big man's bent-over form as a shield while she assessed the positions of the other two. The blond man was reaching into his jacket, possibly for a weapon, while the dark-haired man was trying to circle around to flank her. "What the hell?" the dark-haired man shouted, his earlier cockiness replaced by confusion and growing alarm. "How did she do that?" Sarah did not answer. She was too busy calculating angles and distances, her mind running through tactical scenarios at lightning speed. The blond man had produced what looked like a knife from his jacket, confirming her suspicion that this encounter had been planned as more than just harassment. The big man was starting to recover from her first strike, gasping for air but trying to straighten up. Sarah knew she had only seconds before she would be facing all three of them at once. Her training told her to disable the most dangerous threat first, which meant dealing with the knife before addressing the others. But as she prepared to engage the armed attacker, something completely unexpected happened. The sound of slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the parking garage, coming from somewhere behind the three men. Everyone froze, turning toward the sound in confusion. A figure emerged from behind a nearby van, still clapping in a way that somehow managed to sound sarcastic and threatening at the same time. The newcomer was a man in his 40s, tall and lean with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors in harsh conditions. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, but like Sarah, there was something about his posture and movement that suggested military background. His eyes swept over the scene with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. Well, the man said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Looks like we've got ourselves a real interesting situation here." He stopped clapping and let his hands fall to his sides, but his relaxed stance was deceptive. Sarah could see the coiled readiness in his muscles, the way he balanced on the balls of his feet. The three attackers were now caught between Sarah and this unexpected arrival, their heads swiveling back and forth as they tried to process this new development. The blond man still held his knife, but his grip had become uncertain. The big man was still struggling to catch his breath, one hand pressed against his chest where Sarah's elbow had connected. "Who the hell are you?" demanded the dark-haired man, trying to regain some of his earlier bravado. "This isn't any of your business, old man. Keep walking." The newcomer smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. "Oh, but see, that's where you're wrong. This absolutely is my business." He took a step closer, and Sarah noticed that his movement was completely silent despite the concrete floor. "You see that lady you're bothering? She's my daughter." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected development. She had never seen this man before in her life, but she was experienced enough to recognize an ally when she saw one. More importantly, she could tell from his bearing and the way he moved that he was former military, probably special forces. The timing of his arrival was too perfect to be coincidental. "Your daughter," the blond man said, waving his knife uncertainly. "She didn't say anything about meeting her father." "Well, that's because I taught her better than to give away tactical information to potential threats," the man replied calmly. "But don't worry, boys. I've been watching this whole thing unfold, and I've got to say I'm impressed. You picked probably the worst possible target in this entire mall." The big man had finally caught his breath enough to speak. "Look, we don't want any trouble with you. This is just a misunderstanding. We were just trying to talk to her." "Is that what you call it?" The man's voice carried a dangerous edge now. because from where I was standing it looked like 3 grown men cornering one woman in an isolated parking garage. And then one of you pulled a knife when she defended herself. He shook his head sadly. That's not talking, son. That's assault. Sarah remained ready to act, but she was curious to see how this would play out. The newcomer was clearly trying to de-escalate the situation through intimidation rather than violence, which was actually a sophisticated tactical choice. Sometimes the threat of overwhelming force was more effective than the application of it. We didn't know she was your daughter, the dark-haired man said, his voice taking on a whining quality. If we had known, we never would have approached her. Oh, so it would have been okay to threaten and intimidate her if she didn't have a man to protect her. The stranger's voice was deceptively mild, but Sarah could hear the steel underneath. That's an interesting philosophy you've got there. The 3 men were clearly out of their depth now. They had probably planned to intimidate what they thought was a helpless woman, possibly rob her and maybe worse. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who had effortlessly disabled their largest member, and a second person who radiated the kind of calm confidence that came from extensive combat experience. Look, we're just going to leave, okay? The blond man said, finally lowering his knife. We don't want any more trouble. Oh, but that's where we have a problem, the newcomer said, taking another step forward. You see, you've already committed several crimes here. Harassment, intimidation, assault, brandishing a weapon. And my daughter and I, we're both upstanding citizens who believe in the rule of law. Sarah understood what he was doing. He was boxing them in psychologically, making them realize that their situation was worse than they had initially thought. It was a classic interrogation technique applied to a civilian situation. What do you want from us? The big man asked, finally straightening up completely but keeping his distance from Sarah. Well, that's a fair question, the man said thoughtfully. I suppose we could call the police, let them sort this whole thing out. Of course, that would mean statements, arrests, probably charges filed. Your names would be in the papers. Your employers might find out. Your families. He paused to let that sink in. On the other hand, if you were to apologize sincerely to my daughter, promise never to bother another woman like this again and leave immediately, well, we might be inclined to show some mercy. The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. They were drunk enough to have made terrible decisions, but not so drunk that they could not recognize when they were beaten. We're sorry, the blond man said quickly. Looking at Sarah, we didn't mean any harm. We were just having some fun, you know. We won't bother you again. Sarah studied their faces, looking for signs of sincerity. What she saw was mostly fear and embarrassment, which was probably the best she could hope for under the circumstances. Apology accepted, she said quietly. But if I ever see any of you behaving this way again, I won't be so understanding. The newcomer nodded approvingly. You heard the lady. Now I suggest you gentlemen make your way out of here before she or I change our minds about involving the authorities. The 3 men did not need to be told twice. They hurried toward the stairwell, the big man still moving gingerly and the other 2 supporting him. Within moments they had disappeared, their footsteps echoing down the concrete stairs as they fled. Sarah turned to face her unexpected ally, studying his face carefully. Thank you for the intervention, but I should probably mention that I'm not actually your daughter. The man grinned, and for the first time his expression was genuinely friendly. Yeah, I figured that out pretty quick, but they didn't need to know that. He extended his hand. Marcus Thompson, Master Chief Petty Officer, retired. And unless I miss my guess, you're military too. Sarah shook Marcus's offered hand, noting his firm grip and the way he made direct eye contact. Sarah Martinez, Petty Officer First Class, retired. Navy SEAL. She paused, then added with a slight smile, and thank you for backing my playback there, Master Chief. Even though I had the situation under control. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Oh, I could see that clear as day. That big boy had no idea what hit him. But 3 against 1 in a parking garage, even when the one is a SEAL, well, sometimes it's nice to even the odds a little. How did you know I was military? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The way she had moved, the precision of her strike, the tactical awareness she had displayed. It would have been obvious to anyone with similar training. Are you kidding? Marcus said. The way you positioned yourself, the way you assessed threats, that beautiful elbow strike to the solar plexus. Hell, I knew you were special ops before you even made contact. Plus, civilians don't usually stay that calm when 3 drunk idiots are trying to intimidate them. Sarah picked up her shopping bag, checking to make sure the Lego set was undamaged. What about you? Were you really just shopping or were you following those guys? Marcus's expression grew more serious. Actually, I was following them. I spotted them earlier in the mall, and something about their behavior set off my alarm bells. They were definitely hunting for someone, scanning the crowd like predators looking for prey. When I saw them lock onto you, I decided to keep an eye on the situation. And you just happened to be in the right place at the right time? Well, let's just say I've got some experience reading people and situations. Plus, I was curious to see how you'd handle yourself. I've worked with a few SEALs over the years, but I've never seen one in civilian clothes dealing with civilian threats. Sarah leaned against her car, suddenly feeling the adrenaline drain from her system. It's different out here, isn't it? In the military, the rules of engagement are clear. You know who the enemy is, you know what you're authorized to do about it. But out here, she gestured toward the stairwell where the three men had disappeared. Out here, you have to constantly calibrate your response. Use too little force and you might get hurt. Use too much and you might end up in jail. Marcus nodded, understanding. The transition is rough. I've been out for 3 years now and I still find myself overanalyzing every situation. You see threats everywhere because for so long threats were everywhere. How do you deal with it? Sarah asked. It felt strange to be having such a personal conversation with someone she had just met. But there was something about shared military experience that created instant understanding. Honestly, some days better than others. I do security consulting now, which helps because I can use my skills in a way that feels productive. But the hardest part is learning to trust that most people aren't trying to hurt you. Most situations don't require tactical thinking. Most problems have simple, peaceful solutions. Sarah considered this. I've been out for 6 months and I still wake up every morning expecting to receive a mission briefing. I still check corners before I enter rooms. I still sit with my back to the wall in restaurants. Give it time, Marcus said gently, and find ways to use what you learned. The military taught us more than just how to fight. It taught us discipline, leadership, problem-solving under pressure. Those skills translate to civilian life. You just have to find the right applications. What kind of security consulting do you do? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Corporate stuff mostly. Risk assessment, executive protection, security system design. Companies pay good money for someone who can think like the bad guys because I used to hunt the bad guys for a living. Marcus pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to her. Actually, if you're looking for work, I could probably use someone with your background. The demand for qualified security professionals is higher than you might think. Sarah looked at the card. It was simple and professional. Marcus Thompson, Security Solutions, with a phone number and email address. I'll think about it. Right now, I'm still trying to figure out who I am when I'm not wearing a uniform. That's the hardest part, Marcus agreed. For so long, the uniform told everyone who you were and what you were capable of. Without it, you're just another face in the crowd until something like this happens. He gestured toward where the confrontation had taken place. Do you think they'll cause trouble for other people? Sarah asked, thinking about the 3 men who had fled. Marcus shrugged. Hard to say. Getting their asses handed to them by someone they thought was an easy target might have taught them a lesson. Or it might have just made them angry and more careful about choosing victims. But at least they know now that you can't always judge a book by its cover. Speaking of which, how did you know to call me your daughter? That was quick thinking. Years of undercover work, Marcus explained. Sometimes the best way to de-escalate a situation is to change the dynamics completely. 3 guys harassing a lone woman is one thing. 3 guys harassing someone's daughter while her protective father is watching is something else entirely. It gives them a face-saving way to back down. Sarah was impressed. That's actually brilliant. You turned a potential fight into a family situation they could walk away from without losing too much pride. Pride is a dangerous thing, Marcus said, especially when it's wounded. Those boys were drunk and embarrassed, which could have made them unpredictable. Better to give them an out than to back them into a corner where they felt like they had to prove something. A car pulled up nearby, and both Sarah and Marcus automatically tensed, their hands moving to positions where weapons would have been if they were still in uniform. When an elderly woman got out and began unloading groceries, they both relaxed and exchanged rueful smiles. See what I mean? Marcus said, always on alert. It's exhausting sometimes, Sarah admitted. But I guess it's better to be paranoid and safe than trusting and sorry. True, but you've got to find a balance. You can't live your whole life waiting for the next ambush. Marcus checked his watch. Listen, I've got to run, but I meant what I said about the job offer. Even if you're not ready for something full-time, I could probably use some help on a consulting basis. Think about it, Sarah nodded. I will. And Marcus, thanks again for having my back. It's nice to know there are still people out there who are willing to help a stranger. We're not strangers, Marcus said with a grin. We're family. Anyone who's worn the uniform and served their country is family, even if we've never met before. That's something civilians don't always understand. But it's one of the things that makes the transition easier when you find other veterans. As Marcus walked away toward his own car, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turn her day had taken. She had come to the mall to buy a simple birthday gift and ended up in a confrontation that reminded her just how different she was from the average civilian. But she had also met someone who understood that difference and could offer guidance on how to navigate this new world she found herself in. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a coffee shop downtown, Marcus's business card on the table in front of her. She had called him the night before, and they had agreed to meet to discuss potential work opportunities. The coffee shop was busy with the morning rush, filled with office workers grabbing their caffeine fixes before heading to corporate jobs that Sarah could barely imagine. Marcus arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a crisp button-down shirt that managed to look professional, without being overly formal. Sarah was learning that this balance between blending in and maintaining readiness was one of the key skills for transitioning military personnel. Thanks for calling, Marcus said as he sat down across from her. I wasn't sure if you would. Honestly, I almost didn't, Sarah admitted. I've been going to job interviews for months, and every time someone finds out about my military background, I can see them trying to figure out whether I'm too damaged for civilian work or too dangerous for office life. Marcus nodded knowingly. Yeah, the stereotypes are brutal. People watch too many movies about unstable veterans. They don't understand that military training actually makes us more disciplined and reliable, not less. So what exactly does your company do? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this potential new direction for her life. Marcus opened his portfolio and pulled out several photographs and documents. We provide security assessments for high-value targets. Corporate executives, politicians, celebrities, wealthy individuals. People who have reason to believe someone might want to hurt them or their families. The photographs showed various locations: office buildings, private residences, event venues. Each one was marked with different colored annotations indicating potential security vulnerabilities and recommended improvements. This is fascinating, Sarah said, studying the images. You're basically thinking like an attacker to help potential victims protect themselves. Exactly. And that's where your SEAL background becomes incredibly valuable. You've been trained to infiltrate, to identify weaknesses, to plan operations against defended positions. All of those skills translate perfectly to defensive security work. Marcus showed her a case study from a recent job. A tech company executive had been receiving death threats from a disgruntled former employee. Marcus's team had assessed the executive's home, office, and regular travel routes, identifying dozens of potential vulnerabilities that the executive had never considered. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to a photograph of an upscale residential neighborhood. Beautiful house, gated community, private security. The client thought he was completely safe. But see this? He indicated a construction site across the street. Perfect line of sight to his home office window. An attacker with a rifle could set up there and have a clear shot during the executive's regular video conferences. Sarah studied the image, her tactical mind automatically running through additional scenarios. What about the landscaping around the house? Those big bushes provide excellent concealment for someone approaching on foot, and the garage is attached, so if someone could get inside the garage, they'd have access to the house without being seen from the street. See? Marcus grinned. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. You look at a suburban house and immediately see tactical challenges. Most security companies focus on technology. Cameras, alarms, sensors. We focus on human factors and operational planning. What happened with the executive who was getting death threats? We redesigned his entire security profile. New routes to work. Reinforced his home office. Worked with local police to increase patrols in his neighborhood. And helped him hire qualified personal protection. 3 weeks later, they caught the guy who was making the threats trying to break into the executive's office building. He had been planning something much worse than just threatening phone calls. Sarah was impressed. This was exactly the kind of work that could make use of her skills while contributing something positive to society. How often do you actually prevent serious crimes? More than you might think. A lot of people who make threats are really looking for easy targets. When they realize their intended victim has professional security, they usually move on to someone else or abandon their plans entirely. It's not always about stopping determined killers. Sometimes it's just about making yourself a harder target than the next guy. Marcus showed her several more case studies, each one highlighting different aspects of the work. There were executives who needed protection during labor disputes, politicians dealing with extremist threats, and celebrities being stalked by obsessed fans. Each situation required a different approach, different skills, and different solutions. The pay is good, Marcus said. Better than most jobs available to veterans anyway. And the work is irregular enough that you could ease into it gradually while you figure out what you want to do long term. What about the emotional toll? Sarah asked. I mean, we're basically spending our time thinking about all the ways people might hurt each other. After years of combat, do you really want to keep living in that headspace? It was a perceptive question, and Marcus took a moment to consider his answer. That was my biggest concern when I started this business. But the truth is, I found it actually helps with the transition. Instead of feeling like my military skills are useless in civilian life, I get to use them to protect people. It gives me a sense of purpose that I was missing when I first got out. Sarah understood what he meant. The hardest part of leaving the military had been the loss of mission, the feeling that her highly developed skills were no longer needed or wanted by society. The idea of using those skills to protect innocent people was appealing. Tell me about the team, Sarah said. Who else works for you? Right now it's mostly just me and a couple of part-time contractors. One is former Army Rangers, another is ex-CIA. We bring in specialists as needed for specific jobs. It's a small operation, but we're growing steadily. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Sarah several testimonials from satisfied clients. The common themes were professionalism, attention to detail, and results. One corporate executive wrote that Marcus's assessment had identified security vulnerabilities that their in-house team had completely missed. I'm interested, Sarah said finally. But I want to start small. Maybe one job, see how it goes, see if this is really something I want to pursue. Perfect. I've got something coming up next week that would be ideal for a trial run. A software company CEO who's been getting harassing emails. Nothing directly threatening yet, but the tone is escalating and he's getting nervous. Simple assessment job. Probably take 2 days and I could use a second pair of eyes. Sarah felt a familiar stirring of anticipation, the same feeling she used to get before missions. It was the prospect of having a clear objective, using her skills for a defined purpose, making a real difference in someone's life. What would my role be exactly? I'd handle the client interface and overall assessment. You'd focus on tactical analysis, potential attack vectors, defensive positions, escape routes, that kind of thing. Basically, think like someone who wanted to hurt this guy and figure out how they might try to do it. It sounded challenging and important, exactly the kind of work Sarah had been hoping to find. All right, I'm in. The following Monday morning, Sarah found herself standing outside the headquarters of Nexus Software Solutions, a mid-sized tech company housed in a gleaming glass building in the business district. She wore dark slacks and a blazer, trying to strike the balance between professional and practical that Marcus had recommended. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried a tablet for taking notes, though her real assessment tools were her eyes and her experience. Marcus met her in the lobby, where they signed in with building security and received visitor badges. The process immediately revealed several security weaknesses that Sarah filed away for later discussion. The security guard was friendly but not particularly attentive. The sign-in process was cursory, and their visitor badges provided access to all floors of the building without any real verification of their stated purpose. First impressions? Marcus asked quietly as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. Too easy to get inside, Sarah replied. Friendly security is nice for business, but it's not great for actually securing anything. Anyone could walk in here with a fake ID and a convincing story. That's exactly what I was thinking. Let's see what else we find. They were met by David Chen, the CEO who had requested the security assessment. He was a nervous man in his early 40s, wearing an expensive suit that somehow made him look younger rather than more authoritative. His handshake was firm, but Sarah could see stress lines around his eyes and tension in his shoulders. "Thank you both for coming," David said as he led them into his corner office. "I have to admit, I'm not sure if I'm overreacting or underreacting to this situation. I've never dealt with anything like this before." The office was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. But as Sarah looked around, she immediately began cataloging tactical concerns. The windows were large and uncovered, providing clear sight lines from multiple buildings across the street. David's desk faced the windows, meaning he would be backlit and clearly visible to anyone with a telescope or rifle scope. "Tell us about the emails," Marcus said, settling into one of the leather chairs facing David's desk. Sarah remained standing, using the opportunity to examine the office layout more thoroughly. David opened his laptop and pulled up a series of emails. It started about 6 weeks ago. At first, they seemed like normal business correspondence. Someone claiming to be interested in our products, asking for meetings, that sort of thing. But when I didn't respond immediately, the tone changed. He showed them the progression of messages. The early emails were indeed professional in tone, but as David had described, they quickly became more aggressive and personal. The sender accused David of being arrogant and dismissive, claimed that David thought he was better than ordinary people, and began making vague references to teaching lessons and getting what you deserve. "Have you contacted the police?" Sarah asked, moving to examine the windows more closely. "I filed a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless the threats became more specific or the person actually showed up here. They suggested I hire private security, which is why I called Marcus." Sarah tested the window locks and examined the glass itself. "Are these windows bulletproof?" David looked startled by the directness of the question. I don't think so. Should they be?" "Probably not necessary," Marcus said diplomatically, "but it's the kind of thing we need to consider." "Sarah, what else are you seeing?" "The sight lines are concerning," Sarah said, pointing toward the buildings visible through the windows. "You're clearly visible from multiple vantage points, especially when you're sitting at your desk. And the office layout makes it difficult to maintain situational awareness. Someone could approach from several directions without you noticing." David was beginning to look genuinely worried. "I never thought about any of this. I chose this office because of the view and the natural light. And those are good reasons," Marcus assured him. "We're not saying you need to work in a bunker. We're just identifying potential vulnerabilities so we can develop strategies to address them." Sarah moved to examine the door and the reception area beyond. "How many people have access to this floor?" "All of our executive staff plus their assistants. Maybe 20 people total. And building maintenance, of course." "What about visitor access? Can people reach this floor without being escorted?" David thought for a moment. "Well, if someone has a visitor badge, the elevators will bring them up here. I think the security desk is supposed to call ahead, but..." He trailed off, clearly realizing that the system was not as secure as he had assumed. Sarah and Marcus spent the next 2 hours conducting a thorough assessment of David's workplace security. They examined entry points, escape routes, camera coverage, and communication systems. They interviewed key staff members about their security protocols and tested various scenarios for unauthorized access. The picture that emerged was typical of many corporate environments. Security measures that were designed more for convenience and liability protection than for actual threat prevention. The building had cameras, but they were poorly positioned and not actively monitored. Access controls existed, but they were inconsistently enforced. Emergency procedures were in place, but most employees had never practiced them. "Let's talk about your home situation," Marcus said as they wrapped up the office assessment. David's expression grew even more concerned. "You think this person might know where I live?" "It's possible," Sarah said gently. "These emails show that whoever is sending them has done some research about you and your company. Your home address might not be hard to find if they're determined enough." They arranged to meet at David's house that evening to conduct a similar assessment of his residential security. As Sarah and Marcus left the office building, they compared notes on what they had observed. "Classic corporate security theater," Marcus said. "Lots of expensive equipment that looks impressive but doesn't actually stop a determined threat." "The windows are the biggest concern," Sarah said. "He's completely exposed when he's working, and the access controls are a joke. Anyone who looks professional and acts confident could probably get to his office without much trouble." "What about the emails? What's your read on the threat level?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "The escalation pattern is concerning, The sender is clearly becoming more frustrated and more personal in their attacks. The references to teaching lessons could be interpreted as threats of violence, even if they're not explicitly stating an intent to harm. Agreed. And the fact that they're focusing specifically on David rather than the company in general suggests this might be personal rather than just business-related. They spent the afternoon researching David's background, looking for potential sources of conflict that might explain the threatening emails. His company had grown rapidly over the past 5 years, which meant there could be disgruntled former employees, disappointed business partners, or competitors who felt threatened by Nexus Software's success. As evening approached, Sarah found herself looking forward to the residential assessment. This kind of detailed security analysis was engaging her tactical mind in a way that felt both familiar and purposeful. For the first time since leaving the military, she was using her specialized skills to solve complex problems and protect people who needed help. The work felt right, like a natural evolution of her military service rather than a complete departure from it. She was still serving and protecting, just in a different context with different rules of engagement. David Chen's house was located in an upscale suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the biggest security concerns were usually package theft and teenagers toilet papering trees. As Sarah and Marcus drove through the winding streets lined with mature oak trees and manicured lawns, the peaceful setting seemed at odds with their mission to assess potential threats. The house itself was a 2-story colonial with a circular driveway and extensive landscaping. It was beautiful and well-maintained, but as Sarah approached the front door, her trained eye immediately began identifying security vulnerabilities. The large windows on the ground floor offered clear views into the interior. The mature shrubs and trees that made the property so attractive also provided excellent concealment for anyone who wanted to approach unseen. David met them at the front door, looking even more anxious than he had at the office. "My wife took the kids to her mother's house for a few days," he explained. "I didn't want to worry them until we figure out what we're dealing with." Inside, the house was spacious and elegantly furnished, clearly the home of a successful professional family. Family photos lined the mantelpiece and hallway walls, showing David, his wife, and 2 young children at various vacations and celebrations. Sarah noticed that many of the photos included location details that could be useful to someone trying to establish the family's routines and habits. "Let's start with your daily patterns," Marcus said, pulling out his tablet to take notes. "What time do you usually leave for work? What route do you take? Where do you park?" As David described his routines, Sarah moved through the house examining entry points and sight lines. The back of the house faced a wooded area that provided natural privacy, but also numerous concealment options for potential threats. The sliding glass door leading to the patio was secured with a basic lock that could be defeated by anyone with minimal skills and simple tools. "David, have you noticed anyone unusual in the neighborhood recently?" Sarah asked. "Cars that don't belong, people walking around who don't live here, anyone asking questions about you or your family?" "Not that I can think of," David replied. "But honestly, I'm not home much during the day, and when I am here, I'm usually inside working or spending time with the family. I don't really pay attention to what's happening on the street." Sarah nodded. This was typical of most civilians who lived their lives without the constant situational awareness that became second nature to military personnel. "What about your neighbors? Do you know them well?" "Some of them. The Johnsons next door are retired, and they're usually working in their garden during the day. The family across the street has kids about the same age as ours, but we're not particularly close with anyone." Marcus was photographing various aspects of the house's exterior, documenting potential security improvements. "What kind of alarm system do you have?" "Basic home security. Motion sensors on the doors and windows, cameras at the front and back doors. It's connected to a monitoring service that calls the police if it's triggered." Sarah examined the alarm system's control panel and found it to be a standard residential setup, adequate for deterring opportunistic burglars but easily bypassed by anyone with more sophisticated intentions. The cameras were visible and well-positioned, but they recorded to a local system that could be disabled if someone gained access to the house. "The good news is that this neighborhood has natural security advantages," Marcus said as they regrouped in the living room. "The houses are spaced far enough apart that neighbors would notice unusual activity, and there's only one main access road, so it would be difficult for someone to approach without being seen by multiple residents. The bad news, Sarah added, is that your personal security habits could use some improvement. Your daily routines are very predictable, you're not particularly aware of your surroundings, and your home is easily accessible to anyone who really wants to get in. David sat down heavily in his favorite armchair, the reality of his situation beginning to sink in. So what do? I can't live like I'm in a fortress. I have a family, a business to run. I need to be able to live a normal life. You can absolutely have a normal life, Marcus assured him. We're just going to make some adjustments to make it a safer, normal life. Most of these changes will be invisible to you and your family once you get used to them. Over the next hour, they developed a comprehensive security plan for David. The recommendations ranged from simple behavioral changes to modest technical upgrades. Sarah suggested varying his routes to work and his daily schedule to make his movements less predictable. Marcus recommended upgrading the home alarm system and adding motion-activated lighting around the perimeter of the house. They also discussed personal protection measures. David would learn to be more aware of his surroundings, to notice when someone might be following him, and to recognize potential threats before they became immediate dangers. Sarah would teach him basic situational awareness techniques that had become second nature to her during her military service. What about my family? David asked. Should I tell my wife what's going on? She's going to notice these changes. Absolutely tell her, Sarah said firmly. Your wife needs to know about the potential threat so she can make informed decisions about her own safety and your children's safety. But you can present it in a way that emphasizes precaution rather than panic. They spent another hour discussing how to implement the security measures without disrupting David's family life significantly. The children's school would be notified about pickup procedures, but they didn't need to know why. David's wife would learn to vary her shopping and exercise routines, but she could think of it as a general safety practice rather than a response to a specific threat. As they prepared to leave, David's phone chimed with a new email notification. His face went pale as he read the message, and he handed the phone to Marcus without saying a word. The latest email was more direct and threatening than any of the previous messages. The sender claimed to know where David lived, mentioned specific details about his house and neighborhood, and made explicit threats against his family. Most chilling of all, the message included a photo that had clearly been taken from the wooded area behind David's house, showing him through his home office window. This changes everything, Sarah said grimly, studying the photo. Whoever sent this has been conducting surveillance on your home. This is no longer just harassment. This is active threat behavior. Marcus was already on his phone calling his contacts in local law enforcement. We need to report this immediately. The specificity of the threats and the evidence of surveillance should be enough to get the police involved more actively. Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers arrived at David's house to take a formal statement and collect evidence. Sarah was impressed by their professionalism and thoroughness. They took the email threats seriously, especially the photo evidence of surveillance, and assured David that they would increase patrols in his neighborhood immediately. Mr. Chen, I strongly recommend that you and your family stay somewhere else for a few days while we investigate this, one of the officers said. Do you have friends or relatives who could put you up? David nodded. My wife and kids are already at her mother's house across town. I can join them there. Good. And I'd suggest you continue working with these security consultants. From what I can see, they know what they're doing. After the police left, Sarah, Marcus, and David spent another hour refining their security plan to address the new information. The situation had escalated from general threat assessment to active protection, requiring more immediate and comprehensive measures. I want to thank you both, David said as they prepared to leave. I know I was skeptical about hiring security consultants, but you probably saved my family from something terrible. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she and Marcus drove away from David's neighborhood. This was exactly the kind of work she had been hoping to find. Challenging, important, and directly helpful to people who needed protection. Her military skills were not only relevant in this civilian context, they were essential. So what do you think? Marcus asked as they headed back toward downtown. Ready to make this career change official? Sarah smiled, feeling more confident about her future than she had since leaving the Navy. Yeah, I think I am. This feels right. It feels like I'm still serving, just in a different way. Welcome to the team, Marcus said. I have a feeling we're going to do some really important work together." As they drove through the city lights, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 week. The confrontation in the parking garage had been frightening and disorienting, but it had also led her to discover a new purpose and a new way to use the skills she had developed during her military service. Sometimes, she thought, the most unexpected encounters could lead to the most important opportunities.